Okay, so if we try to finish this video, I have this quantity that I need to simplify because I have it times sine x. So I'm gonna simplify this quantity. So I have 2 sine x cosine x times cosine x. So it'd be 2 sine x cosine x squared because I have a cosine times a cosine. Or cosine squared x, sorry. Plus, if I distribute my sine into this quantity, it's going to be 1 times sine, which is just going to give me a sine x. And then negative 2 sine squared x times sine is going to give me negative 2 sine cubed x. Because I'm going to have 2 sines multiplied by 1 sine will give me 3. Plus sine x equals 0. So now if I look at my quantities, I have a sine x and another sine x, so I can combine those two. So now I have 2 sine x cosine squared x plus sine x and sine x is going to give me 2 sine x minus 2 sine cubed x equals 0. So now I have to figure out what I can do to break this apart. So if I'm looking at it, I have a sine in each that I could take out, and I also have a 2 in each quantity that I could take out. So if I take out a 2 sine x, I'm factoring it out. So I'm kind of dividing it out. That's what factoring is. So if I factor out a 2 sine x out of my first term, I'm just going to have my cosine squared x left. If I factor out a 2 sine x out of 2 sine x, it doesn't just magically go away, it's a 1. And if I factor out a 2 sine x out of negative 2 sine cubed x, I'm going to end up with a negative sine squared x. Because I'm factoring out 1, I'm dividing out 1 sine, so that's still going to leave me with sine squared. So I'm getting closer to what I want. If you know Pythagorean identities, this you should identify as cosine squared x. So 1 minus sine squared x is cosine squared x. If you remember the trig identity, I'm going to write it off to the side. Sine squared x plus cosine squared x equals 1. And if I were to move my sine squared x over, I would get cosine squared x equals negative 1. Oops, sorry. 1 minus sine squared x. So I could plug in that cosine squared x in for that quantity. So now I have 2 sine x isn't changing. I have a cosine squared x plus another cosine squared x equals 0. We're getting closer. We're not quite there yet. So if I have cosine squared x plus cosine squared x, I have 2 cosine squared x. So 2 sine x is going to multiply by 2 cosine squared x equals 0. So now I can factor both, or I can set both factors equal to 0. So I would set 2 sine x equal to 0, 2 cosine squared x equal to 0. And then I want to solve for sine and cosine. So this one's easy. I would divide by 2. So I have sine x equals 0. And this one, I would also divide by 2. And I get cosine squared x is equal to 0. If you remember what cosine squared x actually means, it's shorthand for cosine x squared. So if I think about that, how would you get rid of a square? What's the opposite operation of squaring something? Would be a square root. So I'd have to square root both sides. So cosine x would equal plus or minus. Whenever you take the square root, you should put a plus or a minus. But since it's 0, a positive or negative 0 is not going to change anything. So I have cosine x is equal to 0 and sine x is equal to 0. So I want my solutions off my unit circle for when sine is 0 and cosine is 0. So looking at my unit circle, I want to find what values make sine 0 and what values make cosine 0. So if I'm looking for when x is 0, that's my cosine, I would have pi over 2. So x is going to equal pi over 2. And I also have cosine 0 at 3 pi over 2. Then I want to find when sine is 0. So if I'm looking for sine is 0, would be at 0. So x is 0. And it's also 0 at pi. Since I started with the interval 0 less than or equal to x, less than or equal to, or less than 2 pi right here, I wouldn't include the 2 pi in my solution because I'm not including it in my interval of solutions. So your final answer would be 0, pi over 2, pi, and 3 pi over 2. And remember, the squiggly brackets just means it's denoting your solution for whatever variable you solved for. I would like you to try on your own, not that stuff. Try on your own sine 2x plus 2 cosine x equals 0. Thanks for watching. Enjoy your weekend.